Welcome to part 3 of 4 of the motor install on the 2003 Honda Shadow 1100. Now it's time to hook our wires up, and you can see I'm routing the wire up behind that chrome cover between the motor and the frame and behind the ignition switch where you put the key in. Furthermore, this wire, the first one I routed up behind, is for the ignition pulse generator. And this one, I believe, is for either the side stand switch or the neutral switch. Condensed answer, there's going to be 3 wires that route up under here. The one for the ignition pulse generator, which is the first one that goes to the side stand switch, and the one for the neutral switch. And let me correct myself. This one's definitely, with the 2 separate male plug-ins, is the one for the neutral switch. Now we have to get these wires routed up between the frame. I'm going to show you where it goes as good as I possibly can. You sort of have to work down below the frame, and you start pushing up in between the other wires, and you can reach around, and there is the one for the side stand switch, and that's one of 3 done. And now we're going to bring the ones up for the neutral switch that gives the indicator light when it's in neutral, makes the light shine green. Indeed, this is one of the sort of irritating parts of this job. It's not the worst, but it's not the easiest. Does not give you a lot of room to bring the wires up through. And then finally, the one for the ignition pulse generator, which is the thickest of all, is going to be the hardest to route up between the frame and that main part of the wire harness that we didn't have to tamper with in the motor removal. But there it is, it's through. And before I actually plug the wires in, let me show you close how they are routed on the motorcycle. Okay, now we will actually plug the wires in. And first we're going to start with the neutral switch. That is the one that's the 2 separate male plug-ins. It's going to plug into the female and route them up in behind this rubber protective cover. It's supposed to keep the moisture and that off of them. And next here is the wire plug in for the side stand switch. Same deal. Route that in under the rubber cover. On the other hand, the wire for the switch for the pulse generator does not fit under the cover. And I checked the videos on disassembly, it was not under it. So we're not going to worry about that. And now we're plugging in the wires for the neutral switch. And here's some more wiring we're plugging back in that went to like the rear tail lights and such. You can on these mix them up because they only plug in one way. So you're not going to. The only one you could in theory mix up was that neutral light switch. But the wires, it is sort of, I don't know why Honda did that. On the one end is different colors than the other. But the hint, there's like a stripe that's the same color as the wire where it comes off the motor of the bike, and you can just match it up with that. Or if it worries you when you disassemble it, just take and label them. Anyhow, there's our wires back in place. And now I'm going to take this rope that I put on earlier and get my wires and hoses and such undone and hook the rear coolant hose up. In the last video, I did the coolant hose to the front cylinder head. Alrighty, with the hose back in place, I'm going to take and slide the clamp back on with my long needle nose pliers. If you don't own a pair of long needle nose pliers, I suggest just for the 2 hoses on this bike, it's well worth the investment. It comes in handy and it just slides right into place. All right, next up, simple one. We're going to put the two bolts in that hold this chrome cover. Again, it protects the motor from the frame, vice versa, whatever you want to say. Not a real big deal on this. All right, there's the upper one tightened, and it'll just slip down and we'll tighten the lower one, and that'll take care of that. I don't think in theory, as tight as that's jammed in there, the bolts would come out that would ever fall out of the bike anyhow. Needless to say, I'm just joking. But now we're going to put the water pump stud back in that we removed before we took the engine out. And it's just sort of a matter of turns in. And this was the deal with the stud. If you watched the removal video, I took one nut and tightened against another one so I could turn it out of the engine. And now I'm just using the two nuts with the socket to tighten it in, and I'm going to use two wrenches to turn well, actually a wrench and the ratchet to turn the one nut free, and that takes care of the water pump stud. Next up, in the order I'm doing things, I'm going to connect the clutch cable back up, and before we bolt it back fast to bracket on the bike itself, we'll just take the end, slide into the groove into the bracket down on the motorcycle on the engine, and there's that, and that's held on with two bolts. Indeed, I try to take the time. 'Cause sometimes a lot of this is not the easiest to explain, but I hope with good video that you're able to understand what I'm trying to explain, what I'm doing at the time. I mean, this is fairly cut and dry and hooking this clutch cable back up, but there are other times that it's not so simple as this. All right, with the final bolt tightened, we're going to take and just make sure pull in on the clutch lever, and it operates as it should. And then we're going to install this side cover, inner side cover, I guess you could say, that goes on before we put the exhaust on. That needs to be put into position. And on the subject of the exhaust, I'm going to install the one on the front cylinder first. Now, your exhaust, this bike has aftermarket pipes on it. Might look different. I'll show you just for the sake of it what I'm dealing with on this bike, but if yours looks different, again, I'll repeat, don't be surprised. Furthermore, I'm starting both the flange nuts where both to the motor on first. And then once we get those turned on finger tight, we can go back around and lift it up into place and get the rear bracket on. And you can see this is a nut and bolt again on this, but how they had it, and just lift it up and we just slide our bolt in, and we can put the nut on from the other side. Now with the exhaust position into place, I'm going to take and tighten the bolt up the flange first. You see, I was using a wobble extension, which gives you a little freedom. Because how that's bent, it's with the straight extension without that little bit of the wobble extension. Didn't let me get on the nut properly, but that wobble extension's all I needed in this situation. Yeah, that takes care of the first pipe. Now we'll put the pipe on for the rear cylinder. And this is a little bit trickier to get the nut started on. It sits in farther back in, and it's not as much room between the cylinder head and the frame of the motorcycle. Now, see, on this pipe, I found it easier to get it positioned on the bracket first before starting the nuts on at the motor. But now, not having to hold the back of it up, I'll take and I can start the nuts. And there's a close-up view of, again, the wobble extension that I was talking about. And here's definitely a bolt nut that's not factory on this bike that goes with the exhaust. It's strictly a 9/16, and there's no SAE bolt on the Honda Shadow, but this again was. And now we can take, which we already did the other side, the rope that I used to hold all the wires and cables, and we can take that out of our way and start hooking up more stuff. And for an easy beginning, I'm going to hook the spark plug wires back up. There's one on the front cylinder and the rear. Make sure it's pushed on tight so it makes good contact. There we have that. Now we can put the carburetors in. And this is sort of, you can watch, I can try to explain it. You sort of have to tilt one way and tilt another. It's sort of, again, the pictures I think will do more justice in trying to explain this. Okay, once you wiggle and jiggle and you get the carburetors into this point, then they just push into these rubber grommets to go between the head and the carburetor. And also, I'll include it right here, a little timestamp. I have a video on just changing carburetors on this motorcycle. So maybe give you, if you're having struggling on your carburetor, it'll give you more pictures to look at. Anyhow, there's a picture of the carburetors completely seated in those rubber grommets, as they should be, before we hook up anything more on the